$2,300,000. That's the number sitting quietly in an account most people will never see. Not because it's hidden, because nobody's looking. You're about to find out exactly how it got there, and why the person who built it never once felt rich while doing it. Here's what it actually took. Polly didn't start with money. She started with $340 in checking, a car payment of $498 a month, and a job that paid $61,200 a year. Decent, not impressive. The kind of number you don't mention at dinner parties because it invites questions you don't want to answer. She was 27. She had a studio apartment renting for $1,650 a month in a city that kept getting more expensive without asking permission. You know this feeling. The one where your paycheck hits and for about 6 hours you feel fine, and then the rent pulls out, and then the car payment pulls out, and then you're back to checking your balance before you order coffee. That was Polly's life for 3 years. Not desperate. Just stuck. Quietly stuck. The kind nobody notices from the outside because you still show up, still smile, still post the occasional vacation photo that took 11 months of careful math to afford. There was a specific Sunday that stuck with her longer than the others. Her mother called the way she did most weeks and asked, gently, the way mothers do, whether Polly had started thinking about retirement yet. Polly laughed it off. Retirement felt like a word for other people with extra money lying around, not people counting down the days until the next paycheck. She said something vague, changed the subject, and sat with a small, uncomfortable feeling for the rest of the night. The feeling of being 27 and quietly convinced that the version of life where money isn't a constant, low-grade stress simply wasn't going to happen for her. Here's the part nobody tells you. The gap between staying stuck and starting to move isn't a windfall. It isn't a lottery ticket or a rich uncle or some secret app. It's smaller than that. It's almost insultingly small. And that's exactly why most people walk past it for years. Polly found hers by accident, sitting in her car outside a Target on a Tuesday, staring at a number on her banking app that made her stomach drop. $190. That's what she had left, 12 days before the next paycheck. 12 days, $190, and a growing sense that this wasn't a bad month. This was just the pattern. The one that repeats until you're 45 and still saying next year. She didn't have a breakthrough that day. She had something smaller and stranger, a decision to look, actually look, at where the money went. Not guess, not feel bad about it. Look. What she found embarrassed her a little. $187 a month on subscriptions she'd forgotten she had. $340 a month eating out, most of it not even enjoyed, just consumed on autopilot between errands. A car payment that was $210 more than it needed to be, because 3 years earlier she'd wanted the nicer trim level and never thought about what that decision cost her every single month since. There was a gym membership at $64 a month she hadn't used in 7 months. A streaming bundle she'd stacked 3 services deep without meaning to, $41 total, for shows she watched maybe twice a month. A habit of ordering delivery on nights she was too tired to cook, which was most nights, at an average of $28 a meal, 4 or 5 times a week. None of it felt reckless in the moment. Each purchase, on its own, seemed small enough to ignore. That was exactly the problem. Nothing ever felt big enough to fix, so nothing ever got fixed, month after month, for years. None of this is the exciting part. Stay with this a second longer, because the exciting part depends on it. She didn't quit her job. She didn't start a business. She didn't discover some secret. She did something almost boring. She moved $340 a month into a high-yield savings account paying 4.6% and left it alone. That's it. That's the whole first move, $340. The same amount she used to spend on food she barely remembered eating. 12 months later, she had $4,080 sitting there, plus a little more from the interest. Not life-changing, not even close. But something had shifted that had nothing to do with the number. She'd proven something to herself. She could do this. The gap between I'll never have money and I have money accumulating right now isn't logical. It's psychological. And once you cross it, you don't go back the same person. Now here's where it gets interesting. Can you guess what happens next? Most people stop here. They save a little, feel proud, and then life happens. A car repair, a trip, a bad month, and the account gets drained back to zero. That's not failure. That's just what happens when saving is the only tool in the box. Polly hit that wall too. 8 months in, her transmission failed. $2,140 gone in one afternoon, more than half of what she'd built. There's a version of this story where Polly gives up right there, and it's worth being honest about how close she came to it. She sat in the repair shop's waiting room, watching the invoice climb on the screen behind the counter, and felt the old, familiar tightness return. The one that said none of this works. Not really. Not for people like you. It would have been easy to close the savings account, spend what little was left on something that felt good in the short term, and go back to living paycheck to paycheck with the comfortable excuse that at least she'd tried. This is the moment that actually separates people. Not the saving, not the discipline. What you do the week after the setback. Polly did something most people don't. She didn't stop. She didn't declare the whole thing pointless. She rebuilt the $340 habit the very next month, and then she asked a question that changed everything. Not, how do I save more, but how do I make the money I already have work while I sleep? That question led her somewhere unglamorous, a Roth IRA. $7,000 a year max contribution, tax-advantaged, invested in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund with a historical average return around 10.5% a year. She couldn't max it out. Not even close. Not yet. But she started putting $175 a month in, on top of the $340 she was already saving. The next 18 months looked almost identical from the outside. Same job. Same apartment, though she did eventually move somewhere $120 cheaper because she stopped caring what the address said about her. Same face in the mirror. But underneath, 2 accounts were quietly compounding. One safe and liquid, one growing and invested. And for the first time, money wasn't something that happened to her. It was something she was doing on purpose. Compare that to someone who did it differently. Same income, same starting point. A coworker of Polly's, a guy named Marcus, who made $64,000, slightly more than her, and spent it on a $52,000 truck with a $760 monthly payment because it felt good to drive something that looked like success. 5 years later, Marcus was still making payments on a truck worth half what he owed on it, and Polly had 2 accounts nobody at the office knew existed. This one is hard to admit, but it matters. Nobody could tell the difference between them by looking. Same office, same lunch spot on Fridays, same complaints about the commute. The entire gap between them existed in a place nobody could see. A banking app, a brokerage account, a series of decisions made quietly, month after month, with no audience and no applause. That's the part people miss about real wealth. It doesn't look like anything. It doesn't announce itself. The people with the most money are often the ones telling you the least about it. There's a strange, quiet shift that happens to how the world treats you once the numbers start climbing, even when nobody can see them. Polly noticed it first at her bank, of all places, when a routine call about a card issue somehow turned into a soft, curious offer for a relationship banking review. The kind of call that only comes once. Certain balances cross certain thresholds the algorithm on the other end can see, even if the person on the phone can't say so directly. She noticed it again when a coworker, hearing she'd paid off her car, asked, half joking, whether she'd come into money, as if steady, boring, saving couldn't possibly explain it, as if the only believable path to a paid-off car was luck. She didn't correct anyone. She let the assumptions sit there, unspoken, because correcting them meant explaining a decade of $340 deposits, and that was a story most people, she'd learned, weren't actually asking to hear. They wanted the shortcut. She'd stopped looking for one. By year 3, Polly's HYSA had grown past $19,000, partly from the $340 monthly deposits, partly from raises that let her push it to $420, partly from interest that had started, quietly, to matter. Her Roth was worth just under $14,000, real growth, market swings included, the kind of number that goes up $600 one month and down $200 the next and teaches you, slowly, not to panic. Here's what surprised her most. It wasn't the account balances. It was how her thinking changed. She started reading the fine print on things. She started asking what her 401k match actually was. 4%, and she'd only been contributing 2%, which meant she'd been quietly leaving $1,224 a year of free money on the table without ever knowing it. That's $1,224 every year sitting there uncollected, gone, for 2 straight years before she noticed. $2,448 she simply never claimed. She fixed it in 11 minutes on a Tuesday during her lunch break. Around this same stretch, a close friend, watching Polly turn down a spontaneous weekend trip because it didn't fit the month's numbers, told her, not unkindly, that she was being too careful with her 20s, that money wasn't meant to be hoarded, that she should live a little while she still could. Polly didn't have a clean answer for it at the time. It stung a little, the way honest things sometimes do. She went anyway, found a version of the trip that cost $340 less than the one her friend booked, and came home to find her accounts exactly where she'd left them. That was the year she stopped needing anyone else to understand the math for it to still be working. The next re-engagement point matters, because this is usually where people assume the story slows down. It doesn't. The next one on this list is the one nobody talks about, and it's the most powerful. Around year 4, Polly's income moved to $74,900 after a promotion she almost didn't apply for because she assumed she wasn't ready. She kept her lifestyle almost exactly the same. Same apartment, upgraded by $80 a month. Same car, paid off now, which meant $498 a month that used to disappear was suddenly hers to redirect entirely. She didn't inflate. That's the quiet decision most people never make, the one that has nothing to do with income and everything to do with identity. She took that freed up $498 and split it. $250 into the Roth, now maxing it out for the first time, and $248 into a taxable brokerage account, something she'd never had before, something that felt almost illegal in how simple it was to open. By this point, the accounts had started doing something strange. They'd started growing faster from returns than from her own deposits. That's the moment compounding stops being a concept in a textbook and starts being something you can watch happen in real time. A little each month, sometimes barely noticeable, sometimes. In a strong quarter. Genuinely startling. Year 6. Her combined accounts crossed $181,000. She was 33. She told almost nobody. Her parents thought she was doing fine, nothing more. Her friends still assumed she was living paycheck to paycheck because she still packed lunch and still drove the same old car, now with 94,000 miles on it and no plans to replace it until it actually gave out. This is the part that's hard to admit. There was loneliness in it. Nobody to talk to about it, because the moment you mention numbers like that, the conversation changes. People look at you differently. Some pull away. Some suddenly need a favor. So she stayed quiet. Quiet became the strategy, not just for the money, but for her peace of mind. There was one cousin, a few years younger, going through a rough stretch, who asked her directly, over a holiday dinner, whether she could spot a few $1,000s. No real plan for paying it back mentioned, just an assumption that because Polly seemed stable, she must have it to spare. Polly did have it to spare. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was realizing that the number in her account, the one she'd built so carefully and so privately, had suddenly become other people's business the moment it was even suspected to exist. She helped, a smaller amount than asked, on her own terms, and learned something she carried for the rest of the climb. The money doesn't just change your options. It changes what people believe they're entitled to ask you for. Here's the part that changes the whole shape of the math. Because this is where most people, when they hear a story like this, assume the ending is small, a nice retirement someday, a bit of comfort. That's not what happened. Between year 6 and year 14, Polly kept doing almost exactly what she'd already been doing. The Roth maxed every single year, now growing on autopilot. The brokerage account, fed by raises she barely adjusted her lifestyle to match. A 401k she finally understood, contributing enough to capture every dollar of match, invested in a simple, low-cost index fund she checked twice a year and otherwise ignored. The market did what markets do. Some years up 22%, one year down 18%, most years somewhere ordinary in between, averaging out over time to something close to that long-run 10.5%. She didn't try to beat it. She didn't chase anything shiny. There was no meme stock, no crypto windfall, no secret trading strategy. Coworkers occasionally mentioned some new opportunity that promised to double their money in months, and she'd nod politely and change nothing because she'd already run the real math, the slow, unglamorous math, and it worked. She let the boring, repeatable decisions compound, year after year, invisible from the outside, undeniable on paper. Around year 11, there was a stretch that tested her more than the transmission repair ever had. The market dropped 18% over a rough 9 months, and the number at the top of her brokerage app, the one she'd watched climb for years, fell by $94,000 in what felt like a handful of weeks. It was the largest single number she'd ever watched disappear, at least on paper, and every instinct told her to stop, to pull it out, to put it somewhere that couldn't fall like that again. She didn't. She kept the $340 going, kept the Roth contributions going, kept doing the boring, repeatable thing she'd already proven to herself she could do, even while the number on the screen made her stomach turn. 14 months later, the account hadn't just recovered. It had grown past where it had been before the drop, and the shares she'd kept buying on the way down, at lower prices, quietly became some of the best decisions she never celebrated. By year 14, at 41 years old, the combined total across her Roth, her brokerage account, her 401k, and the high-yield savings she still kept for emergencies crossed $2,300,000. $2,300,000. Built from $340 a month and a decision made once in a parking lot outside a Target to actually look at where the money was going. Nobody at her office knows. Her landlord doesn't know. The barista who makes her coffee every morning doesn't know. She still drives a car worth less than $9,000. She still packs lunch 3 days a week, not out of necessity anymore, just out of habit. A habit that quietly built a fortune while everyone assumed she was simply careful with money in the small, forgettable way that never adds up to anything. Except it did. It added up to everything. Not because any single month was remarkable, but because 240 ordinary months in a row, quietly, without an audience, refused to be broken. Here's what nobody tells you about the moment you cross a number like that. It doesn't feel like fireworks. Polly found out on a Sunday night, checking her accounts the way she'd checked them 1,000 times before, out of habit more than excitement. She saw the total. She sat with it for a long moment. And then she closed the laptop and made dinner, because the strangest part of real wealth, the part almost nobody warns you about, is how ordinary the day still feels when you finally get there. That's the part worth sitting with. The version of success we're sold is loud. The car, the house, the applause. The version that actually happens, for most people who really build something, is quiet. It's a Tuesday. It's 11 minutes fixing a 401k match. It's $340 a month you don't even miss because you never really enjoyed spending it in the first place. It's the decision, made over and over, to not be the person who explains a truck payment to justify how they feel about themselves. You don't need $2.3 million to feel the shift Polly felt in that parking lot. You need the moment where you stop guessing and actually look. That's available to you right now. Tonight, in about the same 11 minutes it took her to fix a mistake that had quietly cost her thousands. The math doesn't care how old you are when you start. It cares whether you start. Someone who begins at 35 with $340 a month, invested consistently at something close to that long-run market average, is looking at a number past $1 million by retirement. Not because they got lucky, but because they let time do what time does when you stop interrupting it. Somewhere near you, right now, someone is quietly doing this, not talking about it, not posting about it, just making the boring decision, month after month, while everyone around them assumes nothing has changed. You could be that person by next year. The account doesn't know your excuses. It only knows whether the deposit showed up. Polly, 6 years in, thought she was still average. 14 years in, she found out average was never the right word for what she'd built. It was just quiet. And quiet, it turns out, was the whole point. If you're doing the math on your own life right now, comparing your paycheck to hers, your age to hers, your starting point to a parking lot outside a Target, stop for a second. The number isn't the lesson. The decision is. It was never really about $2.3 million. It was about a version of Polly who decided, on an ordinary Tuesday, that she was allowed to look closely at her own life without flinching, and then allowed herself to change one small thing because of what she saw. You have a version of that Tuesday available to you. Maybe it's a subscription you forgot you're paying for. Maybe it's a 401k match you're not fully claiming. Maybe it's just the decision to open the account and actually look, instead of guessing, instead of assuming you already know what you'll find. The number waiting on the other side of that decision won't announce itself either. It will just sit there, quietly, getting a little larger every month, whether or not anyone else ever finds out it exists.